Who doesn't like to do that sometimes? When you make something and you get so frustrated because of your results. You just want to tear up your work. Well, I'm going to show you how you can use certain skills and techniques, how to avoid ripping up your work like that. So what I've found with my students is that the most common issues with watercolor is students use the wrong size brush for the size of the shapes that they would like to paint. I have these 3 brushes ready, and these are sufficient for me to work on this still life. But I'll show you a few things what you should not do in my opinion. So I've mixed a medium grey, and we are only using a Payne's grey or a black or an indigo, something that's neutral for this exercise, and I've mixed a light grey version. So for example, people pick up this brush and they are going to work on this really small cup. It is just very hard because you cannot control the amount of water that you put on the paper very well. As soon as you lift up your brush, you're dropping in quite a bit of water. Then you rinse your brush, you use clean water and you control that water. But what happens too is when they then add water, they add too much. And when you add too much water, you end up with a puddle on paper. You see there, that's a big puddle. We'd really like to avoid those unless you like cauliflower shapes. So what happens too with this is that because everything is so wet, the pigments have lots of time to spread across the paper, and all these grey pigments will actually spread all the way towards the end, and what you end up with is a flat wash. No shape at all. So what I'll do is I'll explain the principle behind it. And basically it's very simple to explain, and I've created a nice strong Payne's grey, bit of indigo, and I'm applying a flat wash. And I'll try to give you some nice close-up sections as well. So this is a nice flat wash that I've mixed in my palette. What I'll do now is pick a smaller brush and I'll drop in just water. So the principle is adding water to the paint, and observe what's happening with the pigments on paper. You can see the pigments are being pushed away by the water. If I drop in another drop of water, you can see the pigments are pushed again away. But in particular where the edges are dry, the pigments are pushed against that dry edge and they will collect there. So once I let this dry, this area in the middle will become a lot lighter, and all the pigments are concentrated at the edge, around the edges here, and that's why we get cauliflowers or blooming effects. So if you understand that when you add too much water, you're pushing the pigments away towards the edge, then you're able to control that. And I'll show you my overview of my palette. 2 pots of water, my paint, my palette and my towel, which is super important. So to control the amount of water that you use, let's say you apply a bit of paint, and I'll show you that in a little still life later. I'll rinse my brush in dirty water, I pick up clean water, I control the amount by scraping it off, or I control the amount by touching my towel. As soon as I touch my towel, a lot of water will disappear out of my brush. Once I have a good feel for that, that feels pretty good. What you then need to see is this paint flowing towards the water. You can see it flowing towards the water. I'll show you what not to do. We have paint too much paint, and then people pick up water out of their puddle and they start too close to here. So what will happen now is that the water is too much and it starts to push those pigments away in the edge. So I'm going to show you a few things that are probably not the best things to do. It's always easy said than done, but I'd like to shape this pot in the background. So I'm starting with applying my color, my paint on a dry surface. I'm using the correct size brush for that shape, which is good. And I'm using these colors to shape the cups in front. Okay, so all this is fine. Then what people do is they pick up the water, they're controlling it, and they push their brush too hard and they have no water and you can almost hear it. Then they pick up more and they start painting very close to this shape. You should start here, work your water that way. But what they do is with the brush quite full of water, and all they do is they brush up and down. Yeah, and they don't work with water anymore. All they do is brushing up and down, and all you do is creating a flat wash. And then they add more water and they start here again. And because everything is so wet, all those pigments have lots of time and space to travel towards the other side. And they work with water again, maybe even more water. And then I want to make things darker, so they add more color. And what you end up doing is you're applying way too much water or watery paint onto your surface. And even though this looks like going from dark to light, it will still flatten out significantly over time when it dries. So I'll show you the way I do it. And we're creating a little bit more color. I'm using exactly the same brush and just follow my steps and my movements across my palette. So I'm applying my blue. Let's straighten it up a little bit. Yeah, so I've applied my paint and it is wet but not too wet. Yeah, there's no puddles there, but it is wet. And I clean my brush in dirty water, I pick up clean water and I'm guessing how much water I need to use. And I'm starting to apply that water right over here, pointing, facing that paint, not like that or not like that. And I can see with the shine of the paper that it is not wet enough yet. So now I feel I've got the right consistency and I can feel it and I can also see it. Just need a touch more. And all I'm doing now is I'm moving that water into that area and I should see the paint, the dark blue paint flowing towards the right. See that? It's almost doing it all by itself. But I'm going to help it along a little bit. So I'm moving my brush in here and I'm pushing it and pulling it into the wet area, into the area that I've pre-wet. That's all the brushing I need to do. So there's something else that people do, and that's crucial. It's not something you should do at all. And that is working in a surface that's almost dry, or not quite. Because once you start adding in colors to fix it and you haven't waited for it to let it dry, you will actually create totally different effects, like I'm showing to you now. So I've filled up my brush with the same blue and I'm dropping that blue, I'm painting that blue in here. So all you're doing now is you're creating an area that is very wet, medium dry and dry. If I let this dry, I'm getting quite a strong blooming effect cauliflower around here, because this is wet, that is dry, this will dry quicker, that will dry slower, and all the pigments are being pushed towards the dry edge and collect there. So what I'll do now is I'll go and work on this little part of my still life and try to show you the way I do it, and just observe my handling of my palette and my use of water and my towel and my brushes as well. So you've seen me demonstrating putting shapes on these little cups by using my palette. In the meantime, you can also see what's happening here, and you can start seeing it separating. That's still very wet and that is dry. So people notice that. So what they try to do now is they try to fix this, and they'll go just like that. Yeah. And this is really going to ruin your watercolor. Because all you do now is you see that and you want to fix that again. So you have to use water. And then you want to fix that again. And then you want to fix that again. And that doesn't look good. Oh no, you've added more paint. And you can also see that the edges are getting stronger and stronger, because all you're doing now is with these movements, you're pushing the pigments, the pigments in the paint towards the edge where they cannot go further, and that's where they collect. And all you end up with is this horrible surface that you've totally overworked, with all the pigments ending up at the edge. But how do you get better at this? How do you improve yourself? Well, it is really practice, lots of practice, but also an understanding of how paint and water works on paper. Because once you understand how things work, you can fix things, you can control them. If you don't understand, you have no idea, or you cannot find solutions for your problem. So really, just to break down to a couple of steps, what are really important is that you need to pick the right size brush for the right sort of shape that you're working on. This brush is too big for this shape. So my brushes are always ready to be swapped over. Control the amount of water in my brush with my towel. And if you just can let the paint do the work for you and let it collaborate with the water nicely, it is such a nicer result. You know, if you can see how the water and the pigments flow across the paper, that's just a beautiful thing. This here just looks really hard work, and it just doesn't look very nice. So what happens too is people work too dry. So when they make a puddle, or if you work from a palette with a flat surface, they don't pick enough paint up with their brush, or their brush is too small. And what they do is they pick up paint once and they keep working with this color, and they don't reload that brush. They keep working with, and it gets drier and drier. You can start seeing dry brush happening. And then suddenly people realize, oh yes, it is getting too dry, I need to add water. So they grab water and they start here, and what they'll do is they add water, but too much water. I remember with my display you can see the water pushing the pigments away. Yeah, it's a horrible way of working. It feels frustrating and the result is not great at all. So to do it properly, use that same brush if you want. Apply that paint, but reload your brush here. Pick up a bit more, start where you finish. Pick up a bit more, start where you finish. So you have a nice consistency of paint that is not too wet and not too dry. I absolutely don't have to rush at all to work on this. But my brush is too small. It'd be much easier if I use this one. But I control the water and I start with my water here, not there. Because then the paint has a lot more space to travel and my gradients, my shapes, becoming much nicer. All I have to do now is just point towards my paint. Don't lift up my brush. Gently pull it back. Have a bit of fun. Finished. There is no reason why you should keep brushing in this like that. Because when you do that, you are working through the first layer that was supposed to be dry, but because you're brushing hard, you're mixing those two layers together, and that makes the paint look flat and horrible. And again, just to show you an example of trying to do this cup with my brush that is just really too big, but I've just forgotten to pick up the other one. And that happens quite regularly, and certainly when you're just painting. And because my brush is too big, I'm adding way too much water. And I'm struggling with precision as well. So the same here, people forget to pick up their smaller brush, and I'm applying way too much. Can't control the amount of water that I'm adding to it. Yeah, then I need to do the inside as well, which is very difficult with a brush like that. Okay, but suddenly I have realized that I've got the wrong brush, so I'm picking up another brush, but I'm applying way too much paint. You can see it's almost a puddle on paper. Too much. And I'm starting to add water, and I'm starting here while I should be starting there. So all I'm doing now is I'm spreading that paint into a flat wash. Yeah, I don't have to control because everything is so wet. My brushes were too big. It's really quite hard work, and I've lost all my highlights like I have here. And just to finish off, I'm just going to make the other side a bit clearer. So I've picked a nice light grey. I noticed it was a touch too dry, so I picked up some water, and now I'm happy with how wet that part is. Just water. Start with your water here and gradually blend it together. That's it, no more brushing. I'm just fine tuning this edge a little bit, so I'm just pointing my brush that way to bleed it in. I actually quite like it like that. If I like something when I'm painting, I will leave it. This here is a little bit unfinished, I'm just going to apply a little bit more shape in this curve. And just working with water now, starting from here. And just gently, with my small brush, move it around. So I can make little finishing touches like here too, where it's white on white. I just want to make that a little bit clear, so I'm adding a touch of paint. Just using water now, control the water on my brush. Start with my water here, and that's enough. The same here, it's a little bit too white, so I'm picking up a little bit of light grey paint, just a touch. Water, control the amount of water on my towel. Too much water. Now I'm right, and I mix that together gently. So I've been able to create this little still life in a controlled way by using my scraping method, using my towel, picking up enough paint, and in that way I can control my painting and create the shading and shapes I would like to paint. While on this side I have no control or very little control. I'm ruining my paper, I'm brushing too much, and the result looks pretty awful compared to that. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and you've picked up some good tips to have more control in how to use watercolor on paper. There are other things you can practice, so instead of just doing little still lifes like that, just keep it really simple and create little abstract rectangles. And all you do is practice that technique by adding paint on paper and then adding water to it and get the right consistency and shine that you can work with. If these are a little bit small, try those perhaps. It is really just a matter of practice and getting a good feel about how much water and paint you need to apply on paper. And if you do enjoy my tutorials on YouTube, I have 2 complete courses that you can sign up for. Please follow the link in the comments, and I hope you enjoyed it.